Good morning, world history students. Happy snow day. I don't see any snow out there yet, but I guess later on it's supposed to snow. Today is February 2nd, 2022, 2022. Today we're going to knock out our warm-up and finish up the rest of our notes on the age of exploration. All of our warm-up is review from yesterday. Question number 1. Where did Christopher Columbus think he was when he reached land in 1492? Columbus greatly underestimated the size of the earth. He thought that he could sail west from Spain, cross the Atlantic Ocean, and arrive in Eastern Asia, China, or Indonesia, what he would refer to as the East Indies. So, Christopher Columbus thought that he was in East Asia. Question number 2. Who gets credit for the first circumnavigation of the Earth? Although he didn't actually complete the journey, he died in the Philippines. It was his expedition, and there were 19 survivors on one ship from Ferdinand Magellan's expedition. Ferdinand Magellan gets credit for the first circumnavigation of the Earth. However, because he didn't make it all the way, we'll use the name of his first mate, who actually did make it all the way around the Earth, Elcano. There was 19 survivors of the expedition. Question number 3. Who are the Americas named after? The Americas are named after one of the first explorers to realize that these continents were not Asia. They were in fact a new world that they had never known about before, new continents. This Italian navigator was named Amerigo Vespucci, and he conducted several voyages of exploration for Spain. Later on, a German map maker is going to label these new continents as America. Question number 5. We're going to define conquistador. You'll find the definition of conquistador on the right side of page 387. It's a leader in the Spanish conquest of the Americas. Now remember that Spain is going to conquer a huge empire. They're going to conquer the Aztecs and the Incas, and we'll be covering that story next week. So Spain's empire eventually will include almost all of Western South America, most of South America aside from Brazil, most of Central America and Mexico, and large parts of the Caribbean. On the other side of the world, it's also going to include the Philippines. That's our warm-up for today. This is warm-up week 21, and the plan is that we'll tournament on Friday. So now we're going to continue on with our study of the age of exploration. We left off with Vasco Núñez de Balboa, who was the first European to cross the American, North or South American continents. He crossed at the Isthmus of Panama, and he set eyes on the Pacific Ocean, which he named the South Sea. He also claimed all the lands that bordered the Pacific Ocean for Spain. Next is one of my favorite stories of exploration. The voyages of Ferdinand Magellan. Ferdinand Magellan set off in 1519, trying to find the sea route to Asia headed west. It was extremely difficult, but he eventually rounded the Cape Horn, the southern tip of South America. He went through what's called the Straits of Magellan today, named after him, before crossing the Pacific Ocean. In the Philippines, Magellan actually was killed by a Filipino, but 19 of his sailors on one ship actually crossed the Indian Ocean, then rounded the Cape of Good Hope of Africa, sailed up the western coast of Africa, and actually did make it back to Spain. Magellan sailed in 1519. Initially, he had 5 ships. By the end, there was only 1 ship and 19 sailors.
Ferdinand Magellan was the man who proved that the world was round.
Ferdinand Magellan showed extraordinary courage by setting out to sail around the globe when there were still many who believed the world was flat and that he would fall off.
Magellan was born in Sabrosa, Portugal around 1480 and studied navigation at an early age.
In 1505, Magellan traveled with the new arriving Portuguese viceroy to India and got his first taste of sea travel, the itch to explore. He moved around Southeast Asia and maybe even traveled as far as Indonesia and what were then known as the Spice Islands.
This is almost certainly where he first got the idea of approaching the Spice Islands by sailing west across the Atlantic rather than east around Africa and then into the Indian Ocean.
When Magellan returned to Europe, he tried to get financing for an expedition to find this new western route to Asia. Eventually traveling past what is today Argentina, Magellan found a route to the Pacific, which is now known as the Straits of Magellan.
Crossing into the Pacific, what Magellan had expected would be a relatively brief voyage to reach the eastern coast of Asia turned out to be 6 months in the open sea before they finally made landfall at Guam, at which point the sailors were, of course, near starvation.
When Magellan and his crew arrived in the Philippines, this was charted territory. They knew where they were.
While still in the Philippines, Magellan was killed by a poisoned arrow on April 27, 1521, in a battle with the locals. His crew continued on without him and finally reached Spain in September 1522, thus definitively proving that the world is round.
Magellan changed the way Europeans navigated. He increased the knowledge of seafaring navigation exponentially, and in the process made the world a much smaller place.
After crossing the Pacific Ocean, Magellan's expedition landed at Guam and then continued west to the Philippines. In the Philippines, Magellan got involved in local politics and was actually killed by a local. Only 18 sailors and 1 ship of survivors completed the circumnavigation and arrived back home in Spain in 1522. Henry Hudson. Henry Hudson was actually an English explorer, and he was on a mission to find the Northwest Passage. The Northwest Passage is the idea that you can go north of North America and then drop down into the Pacific Ocean and find a way to Asia. Now, it is possible today with submarines or modern icebreakers, but the truth is that the Arctic Ocean is ice-packed, and so that the Northwest Passage doesn't really exist. So they were looking for something that was actually mythical. It doesn't really exist. So Henry Hudson made several voyages to North America, beginning in 1607 on behalf of England. He explored much of Canada and the northeastern United States. Hudson Bay up in Canada, as well as the Hudson River in New York City and New York State, are named after Henry Hudson.
Henry Hudson was the greatest explorer whose dreams never came true.
Henry Hudson was an English navigator and explorer who repeatedly tried to find a route from Europe to Asia without success.
He is considered the person who is in effect responsible for the founding of New York City. And he is also considered one of the founding figures of Canada because of his discovery of Hudson Bay.
Little is known of Hudson's early life, but many believe he was born around 1565 in England. Hudson became a skilled sailor and navigator.
In 1607, he convinced a group of investors to sponsor an expedition that would take him from England to East Asia.
The goal was to find an ice-free passage to China, sailing essentially north around the European continent.
In the next 2 years, Hudson tried twice to find a route to the Far East via the Arctic Ocean, but he was unsuccessful. Between expeditions, Hudson is believed to have married and had 3 sons.
In 1609, with the backing of Dutch investors, Henry Hudson decided he would try to look for the Northwest Passage. His crew sailed south and west across the Atlantic Ocean.
Hudson turns south and sails into New York Bay and up the Hudson River that bears his name today, looking for some kind of inlet or bay that would turn out to be a passage through the continent.
In 1610, this time sailing under the British flag, Hudson again tried to find the Northwest Passage to the Pacific. This time following a more northern route, he sailed into what is now the Hudson Strait and then into the bay.
When he sails into Hudson Bay, which of course is large enough so there's actually tidal pull in the bay, it was very easy to mistake it for a passage to the Pacific. And Hudson was not willing to believe otherwise.
He and his crew spend the rest of the summer looking for a passage farther west because they realize they are not in East Asia.
In November 1610, Hudson's ship became icebound in the Hudson Bay during a terrible winter. Finally, in June, the ship was able to leave, but Hudson refused to go home, and so the crew mutinied.
They placed Henry Hudson, his son, and about 7 other members of the crew in a shallop, a small boat, and set them adrift, and then proceeded to take the ship back to England. Henry Hudson and the other maroon sailors were never heard from again.
Many people think that Henry Hudson was a failure because he never achieved his life's goal, which was to find a quick water route to Asia. What we should remember is that he was an able navigator, that his ships always made it back to their investors, and that there is now more water named for Henry Hudson than any other human being who's ever lived.
On one of Henry Hudson's expeditions, his ship and crew got stuck in Hudson Bay over a very long winter. There was a mutiny, and his crew placed Henry Hudson and just a couple other people, including his son, on one of the small ship's boats, pushed him away, and they were never seen or heard from again. Now, as you can see from the satellite image of North America, the Arctic Ocean, from Greenland to Hudson Bay to Alaska to Russia, is ice-packed. Normal wooden sailing ships cannot get through this solid ice. Now, it is possible for some modern icebreakers and submarines to make the Northwest Passage, but the truth is the Northwest Passage was a myth. That's where we'll conclude our lecture today. I'm hoping that I see everyone in class tomorrow, and we'll finish up with the rest of our explorers. Here's our warm-up again. You're welcome to take a screenshot if you want. We'll turn in our warm-up on Friday. Your Age of Exploration map is due on Thursday. That's tomorrow, February 3rd. And the next 3 reading guides are published and are on Canvas for you to start working on. They're not due till next week on the 8th, the 9th, and the 11th. That's 18.1, 18.2, and 18.3. Well, I hope it snows and you all get to go out and have some fun. Have a great day. I'm headed to the junior high state tournament, so I will hope to see you all soon. And that's the end of our class.